Toastmaster. The topic I'm speaking on this evening is one we tend to shy away from for two reasons. One is that there is a little bit of a stigma towards it. And two, I think there's a lack of understanding around it. The topic I'm speaking of is depression. For our purposes, we define depression as a state in which the things that used to give us joy no longer do so. I would venture to say that at least 50 to 60% of the people in this room have at some stage brushed shoulders with the demon of depression. Maybe you were aware of it. Maybe you didn't know what it was. Maybe it lasted for a long period or a short period. Let me tell you about Carol. Carol had the perfect life. She had friends, family, loved ones, but one day her world was completely turned upside down. The one that she thought she could count on the most turned out to be the one who would betray her. And to add to the pain, friends and family knew about what had happened. So besides just feeling pain, she also felt humiliation. She felt as though she had been thrust into a dark pit with no escape. The pain became so unbearable that Carol decided the only way to make the pain go away was to make Carol go away. Lucky for her, she was sectioned, she was drugged, she was treated, and she was thrust back out into society. 95% of the people who knew Carol had no idea what she had been through. This is why I think it's important for us to talk about depression. We need to tell people who suffer depression that it's okay. They can share their experiences with us. And this leads us to the next part of my talk, because my goal tonight is to not only bring light to this topic, but also to share some coping mechanisms that each of us can use and share with the people around us. Because I think that the reason a lot of people suffer from depression, stress, anxiety is because there is a gap between the challenges of life and the techniques available to them to respond to those challenges. So today I'm going to share 3 coping techniques. The first 2 are advocated by a Dr. Jason Satterfield in his book, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, Techniques for Retraining the Brain. The first one is somatic quieting, which is really just a fancy way of saying what we think of as one form of meditation. So I'd like to invite the audience to please close your eyes. The first thing we're going to do is experience the sensation of our eyelids folded over our eyes. Notice the tension in the shoulders. And now we're going to inhale over the count of 5 and exhale over the count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and exhale 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you could please open your eyes. This is just a snippet of what a somatic quieting session may look like. It could be a very brief emergency rescue session in the middle of a stressful or anxiety-filled day. It could be 10 of such breaths. You may have to run to the bathroom and lock the door and carry out such a session, or it could be a longer session that you take either before the day begins or at the end of the day. The idea behind this is based off of research from a Dr. Peter Levine. And the idea was that our body has a natural response to threat and flows in certain cycles. Our responses are fight, flight, or freeze. And sometimes the natural cycle becomes disrupted and we become stuck in that mode. And the way to reset and move the body back into its natural cycles is to get in touch with the sensations in the body. The second technique I would like to share is called thought journaling. And I know Jennifer discussed something along these lines. So thought journaling is basically a scientific method that we can use to almost hack what is going on inside our brains and what is driving our behaviors. We know that we have a constant stream of consciousness that runs through our minds throughout the day. We call these automatic thoughts. Thoughts are not really facts. They're either helpful or unhelpful. So if we want to analyze what's going on, the first thing we need to do is catch the thoughts. So as we notice unhelpful thoughts running through our minds, stressful thoughts, anxiety-inducing thoughts, if we're carrying out the thought journaling method, we need to write these thoughts down. After we've collected enough data, say over the period of 3 days, then we can analyze what is the underlying belief. Because our behaviors are driven by our thoughts, and our thoughts stem from underlying beliefs. Let me tell you about Pierre. Pierre was having trouble in his love life. No matter what he did, he seemed to be driving women away, and he didn't know what was going on. So he decided to begin thought journaling. After a week, when he looked at the thoughts that he had written down, he noticed a pattern, a theme. She's not going to call back. She's not going to text me back. Oh, she doesn't like me. And then Pierre realized the underlying belief was that he was unlovable. So the next stage of thought journaling is to then look for evidence for and against the belief. And the advice is to imagine what an encouraging friend would say to you in that position. Actually, Pierre, you're quite the charmer. Actually, Pierre, I think there's a lot of interest out there around you. Actually, Pierre, I think you've got a few things going for you. When Pierre began looking for evidence for and against this unhelpful belief, he found there was no basis for it, and he was eventually able to change his unhelpful thought patterns. The third technique that I would like to share is one we are all too familiar with, optimism. But just because we've heard it a million times, that doesn't mean that we should toss out Pollyanna's glad game. In fact, 5 decades of research supports the effectiveness of optimism. One 2017 study tracked 309 middle-aged patients preparing to undergo coronary artery bypass surgery. So these patients were psychologically assessed on their levels of optimism, depression, neuroticism, and self-esteem. The patients were tracked over a period of 6 months. At the end of 6 months, it was discovered that optimists were 50% less likely to require repeat surgery. Another similar study followed 298 patients preparing to undergo angioplasty. And again, the findings suggested that pessimists were 3 times more likely to require repeat angioplasties or other bypass surgery. I think it's safe to say that we don't need to wait for more research and evidence. Optimism is something that we can start practicing today, and it is highly effective. So how do we practice it? If you go down to Kmart or the warehouse, you might be able to pick up a gratitude journal. That's one way we can practice optimism. Another far simpler way is in the car or in the train going to work. Just make 2 or 3 statements of gratitude. It might look something like this. I'm thankful that I have shoes on my feet today. I'm thankful for the warm cup of tea I had this morning before I left the house. As we continue to practice optimism, we will find that it is not only good for our mental health, for our well-being, but also our physical well-being. In conclusion, depression is a formidable foe that continues to wreak havoc on society, driving very poor outcomes for well-being and our health. But I think as we bring the conversation into the light, we will generate more safe spaces for sufferers of depression, stress, and anxiety. And as we normalize the mechanisms that people can use to combat depression, then we will equip them with weaponry. So the next time that depression raises its ugly head, they'll be able to stand and say, I'm ready. Toastmasters.
Thank you very much for that, Ruth. That was very